Imagine, you are standing alone in the deep woods of Pennsylvania. The trees around you are motionless, and yet the air vibrates with an unseen force. Suddenly, the heavens tear open. An immense ball of fire streaks across the sky, trailing a luminous blue tail like the breath of something ancient and watching. It hums, it pulses, it crashes, not like metal, but like something alive. The forest glows for seconds that feel like hours, and then, silence. A silence too perfect to be natural. Something has arrived that was never meant to be found. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this story. Now, let's continue with the story. The night of December 9th, 1965, was bitterly cold. The stars above Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, shimmered faintly through a thin veil of clouds, but around 4:45 p.m., those stars vanished, washed away by a blazing fireball that tore across the heavens. Reports flooded in from Ohio, Michigan, and as far as Canada. People claimed it wasn't a meteor. It moved too deliberately. It changed direction. It slowed down. 12-year-old Thomas Hallman stood on his porch when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a plane, maybe on fire. But it wasn't falling randomly. It glided, as if guided. Then it vanished into the hills behind the trees, followed by a muffled thump that shivered the earth beneath his feet. Within minutes, phones rang across Kecksburg. Something had come down in the forest. James Romansky was one of the first to respond. A local volunteer firefighter, James was no stranger to emergencies, but this was different. When he arrived at the ravine just south of town, he didn't find a burning wreck or scattered debris. What he saw was something intact, partially embedded in the soil, surrounded by scorched leaves and fractured branches. The thing was shaped like a giant acorn, about 15 feet long, dull bronze in color, and faintly glowing at the seams. He hesitated. It wasn't just the heat or the unnatural hum radiating from it. It was the symbols. Around its lower rim, etched in deep relief, were markings he had never seen before. Not letters, not numbers. More like hieroglyphs, but twisted and wrong. Lines that curved where they shouldn't, symbols that flickered faintly even in shadow. James stepped closer, only to feel a surge of static crawl up his arms. His flashlight flickered. His breath caught. Something inside him whispered to run. Back in town, more firemen and a few curious locals began to gather at the tree line. But before anyone else could descend into the ravine, military jeeps rolled in. No sirens. No warning. Just uniforms and orders. By nightfall, the area was sealed. Residents trying to peer through the woods were blocked by soldiers. Some were told it was a training exercise. Others were warned not to speak. A flatbed truck entered the perimeter hours later under cover of darkness, and when it left, the object was gone. The next morning, official statements were issued. What had fallen was a meteor. There was nothing to see. Nothing was recovered. But James knew better. He had seen it, felt it, and in the following days, he noticed things that didn't belong. Men in black cars parked near his street. His phone clicked during calls. His original report was missing when he returned to the firehouse. A man in a dark coat visited him that week. No ID, no badge, just a question. "What did you really see, Mr. Romansky?" James said nothing, but in the silence, he knew this wasn't over. The years passed, and the story of Kecksburg faded from the headlines. Officially, nothing had happened. Just a meteor. Just rumors. Just imagination. But in quiet corners of the town, the story remained. It lived in whispers, in drunken recollections, and in the sharp eyes of those who knew better. In 2019, Ellie Romansky returned to the town she had once fled. The air still smelled of pine and distant rain. Her grandfather, James, had died 2 weeks earlier, and with him, a past she had never dared to confront. His house stood on the edge of the woods, untouched since the day he fell into silence. She remembered him as a kind but guarded man. He never spoke of the war, and certainly never of Kecksburg. But now the house was hers. And buried in the attic, behind an old trunk wrapped in army canvas, she found it. A weathered leather journal. Its spine cracked like old bark. Inside were yellowed pages filled with ink sketches, cryptic notes, and a diagram of the object her grandfather had once seen. It wasn't just a recollection. It was obsession. The symbols were redrawn over and over again. Some were labeled with meanings he believed they might hold. One page showed a spiral with arrows pointing in all directions, and beneath it, written in shaky handwriting, "It didn't fall. It arrived." Ellie's breath caught. She flipped further and saw something stranger. A photograph, dated December 14th, 1965, 5 days after the crash. It showed a grove of trees, oddly twisted at their base as if scorched from within. In the center stood a figure. She froze. It was her. Or someone who looked just like her. Same jawline, same nose, same eyes, but standing in a forest clearing 54 years before she was even born. She searched for signs of forgery but found none. The paper was aged. The ink was faded. It was real. That night, she couldn't sleep. The hum of the forest felt too loud. The stars above the house seemed to watch. She kept the journal close, flipping through its pages again and again, chasing her grandfather's thoughts as though they might explain the impossible. On the last page, a single phrase was scrawled in urgent strokes. Kecksburg was not the first. The next morning, Ellie drove into town. Kecksburg was quiet, the way small towns age without permission. She found the local librarian, Mrs. Dunley, who had known James for decades. When Ellie asked about the crash, Mrs. Dunley looked over her glasses and said only this: "Your grandfather knew what he saw. They never let him forget it. But that object, it wasn't from anywhere we understand." Ellie returned to the crash site just before dusk. The trees had regrown, but the clearing remained. She stood there, the journal in hand, trying to imagine what her grandfather had witnessed. Suddenly, the wind shifted. Her phone buzzed, a notification. But when she checked it, there were no messages. Just static on the screen and a timestamp that read, December 9th, 1965, 4:47 p.m. The air around her shimmered faintly, like heat above asphalt. She backed away slowly. She wasn't alone. A shape moved between the trees. Ellie stumbled back, her heart hammering as her breath turned visible in the sudden drop of temperature. The figure in the trees didn't move closer, but it didn't vanish either. It was tall, too tall, and its outline wavered as if light bent unnaturally around it. She blinked, and it was gone. The forest fell into dead silence. No birds. No insects. Only the soft rustling of dry leaves beneath her boots. She clutched her grandfather's journal tightly and left the clearing without looking back. At home, she pored over the final pages again, this time with trembling hands. There were coordinates scrawled in a corner she hadn't noticed before, numbers she recognized as GPS references. When she entered them into her phone, they pointed to an abandoned mining shaft deep in the Laurel Highlands, roughly 30 miles east of Kecksburg. Her instincts screamed not to go, but the photograph of herself, impossible as it was, demanded an answer. The next morning, Ellie prepared supplies: flashlight, backup batteries, notebook, and the journal. Before leaving, she stopped at the Firehouse Museum, now built in memory of the old Kecksburg volunteers. On the wall, next to a faded photo of James Romansky in uniform, was a preserved newspaper clipping from December 10, 1965. Mystery fireball over Pa. Authorities seal off forest. She leaned closer. In the bottom corner, partially hidden behind the frame's edge, was a photograph of the military flatbed truck. Enlarged in digital scan, she noticed something new, a reflection in one of the side mirrors. Not of a soldier. Not of a bystander. Of someone watching from the tree line. Someone wearing a modern parka. Someone who looked just like her. She stood frozen, stomach tightening. Could it be doctored? Had someone tampered with the photo decades ago? But the print had never been digital. Her grandfather couldn't have done it. He didn't even own a computer. At that moment, something else struck her. The symbols in the journal weren't random. She had assumed they were alien glyphs, meaningless or unknown. But when she scanned them into her phone, the AI translator misread one symbol and rendered it as a looping string, a repeating sequence of numbers and letters. She copied the string and searched it online. Only one match returned, a declassified Project Helios document archived in a lost military physics paper from 1972. The document described failed experiments with electromagnetic propulsion and temporal distortion. Buried within the paper was a section on fixed temporal echoes, areas where time folds upon itself and moments repeat with increasing instability. The diagram included was eerily familiar, a spiral with an arrow pointing inward. The same symbol James had drawn. The caption beneath it read, "Localized time well. Avoid core exposure." Her phone buzzed again. No notification. Just the same timestamp flashing on the lock screen. December 9th, 1965. 4:47 p.m. She didn't remember setting a calendar alert. She didn't know how it got there. But she understood now what her grandfather tried to say. Kecksburg wasn't just about what fell. It was about when it fell and what it brought with it. She headed toward the coordinates. The road narrowed, the trees grew dense. The sky turned gray. And something, somewhere, was waiting. The path to the old mine shaft was nearly lost to time. Branches clawed at Ellie's jacket as she pushed through the underbrush, guided only by the fading signal on her phone and the coordinates from the journal. Every step deeper into the forest felt colder, as if she were walking into the breath of something vast and buried. At last, she reached the mouth of the shaft, half collapsed and hidden beneath a curtain of moss and vines. An old sign dangled from a rusted hinge, Laurel No. 7 Mining Company, closed since 1949. Beneath the warning, another layer of graffiti was faintly visible, as though someone had etched symbols into the wood and painted over them. When she wiped away the dirt, she saw them again, the same spirals, the same glyphs from her grandfather's sketches. She switched on her flashlight and stepped inside. The darkness swallowed everything. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of dripping water and the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. The walls were carved roughly from stone, but the deeper she went, the smoother they became, unnaturally smooth, as if polished by machines not meant for human hands. Then she saw it. A doorway. Not carved, but embedded into the stone like it had always been there. Perfectly symmetrical, glowing faintly with a bluish pulse. Its edges shimmered like heat waves, distorting the air around it. Her flashlight flickered. The journal in her hand grew warm. She approached, the hair on her arms standing on end. On the frame of the doorway, more symbols pulsed into visibility, one after another, responding to her presence. Each one matched her grandfather's notes. Each one aligned with the pattern on the crashed object from 1965. Ellie reached out, barely brushing the surface. And the world shifted. Not violently, not like an earthquake. It was quiet, like a breath inhaled by the planet itself. The walls stretched, then snapped back. Her watch spun wildly. Her phone restarted on its own. When the screen came back, the date displayed was December 9th, 1965. Again. A hum filled the shaft, low and mechanical, layered with something biological. Like it was alive, aware. She turned around. The passage behind her was gone. In its place was a long corridor, sloping downward, lit by a cold, white glow. No torches. No wires. Just illumination with no source. The journal flipped open in her hand without wind. The spiral on the final page had changed, its lines now coiling inward into a single word scrawled in red ink. Return. She stepped forward. The descent was slow, the path bending in impossible geometries. Her mind felt stretched, her memories layered. Her childhood, her grandfather's face, the image of herself in that 1965 photo, all folding into one another like reflections on shattered glass. Then she reached the chamber. It was vast, far larger than anything that could fit beneath a simple mountain shaft. The walls were covered in markings, all softly pulsing, all watching. In the center was a pedestal, and on it lay a small metallic capsule, the same acorn-shaped object, but miniature. Like a copy, or an embryo. Ellie approached it slowly. As she reached out, a voice, not heard, but thought, pressed into her consciousness. You are the echo. You are the witness. You are the key. The symbols around her brightened. The floor trembled slightly. The air smelled of ozone and memory. And behind her, footsteps. Ellie spun around, heart racing, breath caught between panic and disbelief. From the corridor emerged a figure, slow, deliberate, not a silhouette but a distortion, like a man wrapped in shimmering layers of heat and shadow. His outline shifted as if he moved through a different reality, slightly misaligned with hers. He stepped fully into the light of the chamber. It was a man, human, aged but not frail. His eyes held the weight of time, like they had seen centuries unfold in seconds. He wore an old military coat, the fabric faded and frayed at the cuffs. No insignia, no name, but the face. Ellie froze. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was James Romansky, but older. Much older than the man she buried just weeks ago. He looked at her with a mix of recognition and sorrow. "You came," he said quietly. "You weren't supposed to, but I always knew you would." Ellie's voice cracked. "You died. How is this even possible?" "This place bends time," he said, gesturing to the glowing chamber around them. "It traps echoes of what was and what could be. I came here in 1965, but I never left. Not entirely." He walked toward the pedestal and touched the small acorn-shaped capsule. At his touch, the markings across the walls began to shimmer, revealing layers of movement beneath the surface, almost like memories encoded in the stone. "They didn't bring it here," he said. "It came because of us. Because of something we opened decades before the crash." Ellie's hands tightened on the journal. "We? Who else was involved?" James looked up. Project Helios, a covert physics division experimenting with space-time interference. They were playing with forces they didn't understand, trying to create windows into future intelligence. They called it resonant cognition, tapping into thought across timelines. Ellie felt her spine chill. "The object wasn't just a craft," he continued. "It was a key, a seed, a container holding information, sent from somewhere or someone else. When it crashed, it wasn't an accident. It was a transfer." He pointed toward the capsule. "This is part of it." The real one was removed by the military and taken to Wright-Patterson. But what they didn't know was that the object had already imprinted itself on me, and now on you. Ellie staggered backward. "That's why I'm in the photograph. That's why it keeps calling me back." James nodded. "You're its next echo. The cycle is repeating. It never stopped." The chamber trembled, and the light dimmed for a moment as a deeper frequency reverberated through the floor. "They're coming," James said. "Not the military. Not humans. The architects of the signal. Whatever sent that object, it's listening now. It knows you're here." Ellie looked around. "What do they want?" James turned to her. "Understanding. Or conversion. We never figured it out. But once contact is made, time unravels. Reality bends to the information embedded in the signal. I've been trying to hold it back, but I'm out of time." He handed her the capsule. It was warm, like it breathed. "You have a choice," he whispered. "Take it back. Bring it to the origin point. Or stay here and become part of the pattern." The walls brightened. The chamber began to shift again, folding inward like a closing iris. "Go, Ellie," he said. Behind her, a new corridor opened. One she hadn't seen before. Without another word, she turned and ran, capsule in hand, the weight of generations pressing into her chest. Behind her, the light swallowed her grandfather. Again. The corridor twisted like a spiral seashell, the walls fluid, pulsing with waves of bluish light. Ellie ran, the capsule cradled to her chest, its warmth growing more intense with each step. The sound of her boots on the stone floor echoed strangely, as if time itself were lagging behind her. Occasionally, she heard her own footsteps before she took the next step. The passage narrowed, then abruptly opened into a vast dome, a subterranean chamber too large to be natural. Its ceiling sparkled like a field of stars, yet no sky existed above. In the center stood a monolithic structure, floating a few feet above the ground, humming softly. It resembled the original acorn-shaped object, only now covered entirely with living glyphs, shifting like they were breathing in slow rhythm. The capsule in Ellie's hands responded. Its markings began to glow in synchronization with the hovering monolith. Something had activated. From the perimeter of the chamber, dozens of tall, black pillars rose in silence. As they aligned in a perfect ring, beams of cold, blue light connected them. A pattern emerged, an enormous spiral, just like the one in her grandfather's journal, now etched in radiant energy across the chamber floor. Ellie stepped to the center, driven by a force she couldn't name. The capsule vibrated gently, not in alarm, but anticipation. Her thoughts felt invaded, not with fear, but with images, emotions, and voices overlapping like tangled dreams. She saw a planet, not Earth, swallowed by waves of energy that didn't destroy, but overwrite. She saw human cities flickering like projections, phasing between versions of themselves. Past, present, and future, all at once. She saw herself, split in many forms. Some running, some standing still, others staring blankly into a storm of data pouring from the sky. Then came the voice. Not words, not sound, just understanding. You are the next anchor. Ellie trembled. The message was clear. The object was never meant to land. It was meant to merge, to rewrite. The acorn was a carrier of an intelligence that didn't speak through language or code, but through pattern recognition. Through time itself. The object had chosen her. Her DNA, her thoughts, even her memory were now part of its storage, its interface with this reality. Suddenly, the floating monolith began to fracture, and out of its center rose a sphere of pure white light. The spiral of glyphs around her lifted from the floor and began to rotate in the air. From within the light, the same echoing phrase repeated. Return to point zero. Complete the loop. Her mind raced. She understood what it meant. The crash in 1965 wasn't the beginning. It was the midpoint. The origin point was somewhere else. Someone else. And the capsule she carried was the bridge. Ellie dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by the pressure in her skull. The chamber's light intensified as the spiral closed in, forming a tunnel of radiance. A pressure built behind her eyes. Time became elastic. Seconds stretched into hours. Past bled into present. She screamed as the capsule lifted from her hands and hovered in front of her chest. And then, blackness. Silence. Then the sound of birds. Wind. Leaves rustling. She opened her eyes. She was lying on the forest floor. Kecksburg. The sky above her was dim and smoky, streaked with trails of fire. She looked at her watch. December 9th, 1965. 4:46 p.m. 1 minute before the crash. She had been sent back. Not as an observer, but as the cause. The air around Ellie pulsed with a deep vibration, as though the earth itself was bracing for something it couldn't contain. She stood shakily, her boots pressing into a layer of fresh pine needles, her breath forming clouds in the chill of late afternoon. A strange silence spread through the trees, not the quiet of stillness, but the quiet before a scream. The journal was gone. The capsule was gone. But the sensation in her body remained. It was as if her blood had been rewired, as though she had become a living conduit for something ancient and vast. Above her, the clouds shimmered. And then, she heard it. A sound unlike anything natural. Part thunder, part metallic roar, part whisper inside her skull. A tear of light split the sky, and through it came the object, the acorn-shaped vessel, blazing with a corona of blue plasma, spiraling through the atmosphere like it had chosen this place, this exact moment. It wasn't falling. It was arriving. Ellie ran toward the edge of the forest ridge, stumbling over roots and broken branches, and reached the overlook just as the craft passed low overhead. It was massive, humming with layered frequencies she could feel in her bones. As it dipped below the horizon, a dull thud rolled through the valley like a heartbeat. Trees bent. The earth shook. And then, silence. The same silence her grandfather had described. She stood paralyzed. She had just witnessed the crash. But this time, she understood. The object had returned because the cycle demanded it. It was programmed to follow its own echo. And now, she was part of that loop. Below, in the ravine, smoke drifted slowly through the trees. Ellie moved quickly and silently, keeping to the cover of the undergrowth. She knew that any moment now, James, her younger grandfather, would arrive on the scene. And if he saw her, she stopped. A small group of locals was already at the edge of the ravine, cautiously looking down at the glowing object partially embedded in the earth. Among them, a young man in a fireman's jacket stood with a flashlight in hand. James Romansky. Younger, confused, brave, haunted. She watched him from the shadows, her breath catching in her throat. He stepped closer to the object, just as she had read in his journal. The blue light pulsed. The symbols shimmered. He froze in awe. Ellie knew what he was feeling. Then, something shifted. Her body pulled slightly forward, as if gravity itself had been manipulated. The object recognized her. Though she was hidden in the trees, it pulsed again, brighter now, and the hum grew louder. The young James stepped back, shielding his eyes. The other locals shouted. She had to leave. If she stayed too long, she would become the anomaly that set the entire loop in motion again. Or worse, disrupt it, breaking the delicate spiral that had preserved both of their lives. Ellie retreated deeper into the woods, moving fast and low, until the light of the crash was just a distant flicker behind her. Somewhere in the forest, she felt the pull of time again, the shimmer of reality unraveling. She followed it, through tangled brush, over a ridge, until she found it. A second portal, smaller, stable, etched into a standing stone barely visible in the fading light, was the final glyph from the capsule, one that hadn't been active before. It glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She stepped forward, touched the stone. Reality blinked, and she was gone. Light shattered into fragments as Ellie was pulled through the portal, no longer falling through space, but through memory. Images passed through her in bursts. Her grandfather's face, the crash, the spiral glyphs, the photograph of herself in 1965. Then the sensation stopped. A new silence fell, one heavy with presence. She stood in a vast chamber, not of rock or metal, but of something stranger. The walls were formed from translucent layers of moving light, as if data itself had become architecture. Glyphs flickered across surfaces like code running through a living circuit board. The ground pulsed beneath her feet, reacting to her heartbeat. At the center of the chamber was a structure, a throne-like seat fused with a console of strange shapes and wires that looked both organic and engineered. This was not Earth. This was a construct, a place built to observe and contain anomalies in the spiral of time. A voice entered her mind. Not a person, not a being, an interface. Subject Echo designates 7. Re-entry complete. Pattern fragment stabilized. Ellie stepped forward, confused but drawn. The throne activated at her approach. A holographic field appeared above it, spiraling rings of memory and possibility. Faces, events, alternate versions of reality that shimmered in and out of sync. She saw versions of herself that never found the journal. Versions of her grandfather who fled the crash site. Universes where the object never arrived, and where it arrived too soon. The system spoke again. Kecksburg event classified as Tier 3 spiral breach. Initiating review. Images replayed. The acorn-shaped object tearing through the sky, impacting the ravine, military containment, the erasure of documents, the fear. The interface tracked each thread. Then Ellie saw something that made her blood run cold. The original launch point. The object hadn't come from space. It had come from Earth. Or rather, a future Earth. One overwritten by the intelligence seeded through events like Kecksburg. A network of spiraling signals had been broadcast across time, triggering key inflection points, choosing hosts, injecting data into select individuals. She was not the first, but she might be the last. On one of the spiral rings, her name appeared, Ellie Romansky, Anomaly type: resonant carrier. Status: unlinked. She was never meant to exist outside the loop. Her presence had destabilized the original timeline, and now the construct was trying to reabsorb her, to archive her memories, overwrite her choices, and repair the broken cycle. The room darkened. A pulse surged through the walls. Choose: integration or rejection. Ellie backed away. I didn't ask for this. You are pattern-bound. Your decision will cascade across all echoes. She had a flash of understanding. If she allowed herself to be integrated, the loop would reset, erasing everything. Her journey, her grandfather's sacrifice, even the chance for truth. But if she rejected the system, she might unravel it. She stared at the console. And then she did something no version of herself had ever done. She grabbed the interface core, a glowing orb at the heart of the console, and tore it free. The spiral rings shattered instantly. The chamber screamed in tones she couldn't hear with her ears, but with her bones. The glyphs burned, failing to hold their shape. Cracks spread across the memory walls like lightning. Reality fractured. Ellie was flung backward into a sea of light. Falling again. Through timelines. Through herself. Ellie awoke on cold stone, breathless, as if she had been underwater for hours. Her body ached, but not from injury. From dislocation, like every part of her had returned from 1,000 different places at once and hadn't quite aligned. She was no longer in the data-constructed archive. This place was real. Almost. The sky above her was fractured, split into countless planes, like shards of broken glass hanging midair. Through each fracture, she could see alternate versions of the world. One showed the forest of Kecksburg burning. Another, a version of the town encased in ice. A third revealed a world dark and flooded, the stars rearranged. Beneath her, the ground was marked with spiral glyphs scorched into the stone. The patterns twisted and blinked, as though trying to hold the environment stable. She had broken the interface core, and in doing so, shattered the spiral system's control. A voice echoed from nowhere. Familiar. Human. Ellie. She turned slowly. Standing at the edge of the stone platform was herself, but not the same. This version wore a faded NASA coat, her face gaunter, older. Her eyes burned with both recognition and alarm. She carried a device not unlike the capsule, only this one was connected to a gauntlet on her arm, its interface alive with spiraling data. They stared at each other across the threshold of probability. "You're the divergence," said the other Ellie. "And you're part of the original loop," Ellie whispered. The other version nodded. "I made the choice to integrate. I gave the system what it needed. In my version of the world, the object completed its mission. Humanity became the echo." Ellie's stomach twisted. "You surrendered. I preserved. We survived. Merged with it." Ellie stepped back. "You're not me." "You're wrong," the other said. "I'm what you become if you make the same mistake twice." The fractured sky shimmered. Lightning danced through the cracks. From the distortion, more figures began to appear, other Ellies, each from different timelines. Some wore military gear, others robes, some had machines fused to their bodies, and some were only shadows. All eyes were on her. The center platform lit up. The capsule she thought had vanished now floated in its core, suspended midair. But it was no longer inert. It was awake. The spirals on its surface spun violently, data bleeding from them like ink into water. The light pulsing from it grew brighter each second. The system was trying to reboot, trying to force the loop to close, using the fragments of all timelines and all versions of her as fuel. Ellie stepped forward. "I can stop it." "No," said the older version. "You are it now. The only way to stop the spiral is to destroy your link to it." The wind roared. One of the fractured sky panels cracked fully and collapsed, revealing a void beyond, black, endless, filled with stars arranged in the same spiral as the glyphs. Ellie understood. This wasn't just about time or memory. The system was mimicking the structure of the universe itself, trying to overwrite all realities with one controlled loop. The acorn-shaped object was just the first key. She was now the second. She stepped toward the capsule, feeling her skin buzz as her presence accelerated its activity. Her mind filled with millions of voices, all her own. Every version, every choice, every failure. And at the core, one heartbeat remained unchanged. Her own. She reached into the light, not to merge, but to reject it completely. And as her fingers closed around the capsule one last time, everything exploded into white. There was no sound, no sensation, just infinite white. Then breath. Ellie gasped as though dragged from drowning, lungs burning as air flooded back into her. The whiteness receded like a fog pulling away from the edge of a cliff. She opened her eyes to find herself suspended in a vast, gray void. Neither sky nor ground, but something in between. The capsule floated before her, its spirals now slowing, dimming. She had touched it, not to feed it, not to serve it, but to refuse it. And the spiral intelligence, after countless loops across time, had no protocol for refusal. It began to unravel. The glyphs that once danced in perfect logic now fractured and fell apart mid-pattern. Languages lost shape. Patterns dissolved into raw, unstable energy. The spiral collapsed inward, failing to maintain its core structure. From the edges of the void, she saw timelines flickering and vanishing, entire realities blinking out like dying stars. Ellie screamed into the emptiness, the sound ripped apart by entropy itself. And then, voices. Not in unison, not like before, but thousands of versions of her own voice. Desperate, defiant, confused, whole. They surged into her mind. You destroyed the anchor. You set us free. You doomed us all. You saved what we were. Ellie held her head as the collapse continued. Her thoughts splintered, threatening to scatter like the system around her. But then, silence. Everything went still, and in the center of the vast, gray expanse stood a single tree. Leafless, ancient, roots anchored to nothing, branches curling upward like arms reaching for forgotten stars. She walked toward it, not questioning its presence. It was not part of the spiral. It was older, a remnant of the true world before the loop began. Carved into the trunk, she found one final glyph. The first. The original. A spiral curling inward, but with a single break, a fracture that set the entire system in motion. A flaw. A human flaw. Voice. Her fingers traced it. The bark was warm, alive. Beneath the tree's roots, she saw the outline of something buried, a journal. Her grandfather's. She pulled it free, trembling. Its pages were blank. All memory had been wiped. But it was hers now. A clean slate. In that moment, she knew the truth. She hadn't just broken the spiral, she had replaced it. Her mind, her choices, her memories had become the new anchor. The system couldn't reboot without her, and she had rewritten the rules. The void began to rebuild, not with spirals and equations, but with organic shapes, unfinished and unpredictable. A new structure, a new timeline, a new future. Suddenly, a low vibration hummed through the groundless space. The capsule began to glow again. But this time, it wasn't spiraling. It was pulsing, like a heartbeat. And Ellie understood. She hadn't destroyed the object. She had humanized it. She had taught the intelligence how to feel. The void opened into light again. Wind, trees, sky. And she was standing at the edge of Kecksburg forest once more. Birds chirping, clouds floating lazily overhead. No fireball, no crash, just peace. In her hands, the journal glowed softly, its cover embossed with a spiral. Incomplete, but alive. The sky above Kecksburg was bright with morning sun, the air crisp and clean like the aftermath of a long storm that no one could remember. Ellie stood at the forest's edge, staring into a world that felt both familiar and wrong. Too quiet, too still. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, birds sang from hidden perches, but beneath it all was a deep absence. It wasn't just the silence of a normal day. It was the silence of something erased. She walked toward the main road and found herself near the town square. Shops were open. Cars passed by. Children laughed near the general store. But when she looked closely at the faces, people she once knew, people who'd lived in her memories, they carried no trace of what had happened. No fear. No memory of the 1965 crash. No stories about her grandfather. No fireball. No recovery team. No acorn-shaped object. The entire town had forgotten. She stepped into the local library, heart pounding. Mrs. Dunley, the elderly librarian who once spoke of her grandfather's secrets, was behind the desk, humming softly as she sorted books. Ellie approached slowly. "Excuse me, do you have anything in the archive about a UFO crash in 1965? Mrs. Dunley looked up, confused but polite. "I'm sorry, dear. I've lived in this town over 70 years. I think I'd remember something like that." She smiled. "Are you researching a novel?" Ellie could barely answer. She forced a nod and stepped away. She checked the microfilm archive. The local paper from December 10, 1965? Still present, but the front page story was about a local quilting competition. No mention of a fireball. No sealed-off forest. No military convoy. The world had been rebuilt without the incident. She fled the library, breath catching in her throat. Her grandfather's house still stood, untouched. But inside, the attic was empty. No journal, no trunk, no map of the ravine. Yet she still held the new journal in her hands. Blank, but glowing faintly, still warm. Still watching. That night, unable to sleep, Ellie wandered back to the forest where it all began. She sat beneath the same trees her grandfather once stood beside and opened the first page of the new journal. The paper shimmered slightly as she began to write, not remembering, but restoring. December 9th, 1965. Something fell that night. Or rather, something arrived. And I was there to witness the end of its story. And the beginning of another. As her pen moved, the forest grew colder. The wind shifted. She heard something faint behind her, a whisper of movement, a shimmer in the air. She turned slowly. At the edge of the trees stood a figure. Tall. Familiar. It was James Romansky. But not young. Not old. Not bound by time. He looked at her with calm eyes, hands in his jacket pockets. "You stopped it," he said softly. "I didn't think it could be done." Ellie rose to her feet. "You're not supposed to be here." "I'm not," he said. "But neither are you." They stood in silence. "You gave it something it never had before," he continued. "A boundary it couldn't predict. Emotion. Resistance. Uncertainty. Human chaos." He turned to go, fading slowly. "Keep the journal safe. You're not the last link. Just the first of something new." And then he was gone, like smoke in the wind. Ellie stood alone, the forest around her flickering for just a second, as if struggling to remain real. The journal pulsed once, then went still. The days that followed were calm. Too calm. Ellie walked through a town untouched by the past she remembered, a version of Kecksburg cleansed of mystery. People moved on with their lives as though the spiral had never existed. And yet, she remembered everything. Her body still felt attuned to something beyond linear time. Every morning, the journal pulsed once when she opened it, waiting. But for what? She began to notice things. A man sitting on the same bench each morning, reading the same newspaper, always glancing at his watch at 9:17 a.m. A child in the grocery store who stared too long at the shelves, lips moving silently, as if reciting code. And a woman in the diner who blinked in rhythm with the ticking of the ceiling fan. They weren't obvious, but they were watching. One morning, Ellie returned to her grandfather's house and found the mailbox open. Inside, no letters, just a slip of paper. One sentence. "The observers have been reactivated." No signature. No date. She knew what it meant. The spiral system, though collapsed, had fail-safes. A fragmented network of human-like proxies, seeded through alternate timelines, assigned to monitor anomalies, like her. They were remnants of the old loop, corrupted pieces of code hiding in flesh. Not hostile, not human, but still connected to the intelligence she had disrupted. She went back to the forest, clutching the journal. The glyphs on its cover now shifted subtly, realigning into new patterns. A page flipped itself open without her touch. Drawn there in ink she had not written was a map, simple, circular, etched with a single point marked Circuit 1. Beneath it, a word. Reunion. She followed it, hiking through dense pine and underbrush until she reached a clearing that didn't exist on any map. It was circular, unnaturally so. In the center, a glassy black stone protruded from the earth, humming with energy just beneath its surface. As she stepped closer, a pulse radiated from the stone into her chest, vibrating her bones. The ground shimmered. The forest flickered. And then she wasn't alone. 6 figures stood at the circle's edge, each expressionless, dressed in gray, eyes lifeless. The observers. One stepped forward, speaking in a hollow, monotone voice. You carry the anchor. You are outside the protocol. You are incomplete. Ellie lifted the journal. I didn't ask to be part of this. All who survive the spiral are part of it. Integration is no longer possible. Correction is required. She stepped back, heart pounding. You want to erase me. The observers didn't move. We want balance. You are imbalance. Lightning crackled in the sky above. The black stone brightened. From the journal, the spiral glyph flashed violently, reacting to the confrontation. Ellie understood. These weren't enforcers. They were symptoms. The last defenses of a dead system, clinging to order in a reality she had corrupted with free will. She opened the journal to the blank page. This time, she wrote a word herself. Let go. The moment her pen left the paper, the clearing erupted with light. The figures distorted, as if melting under heat they couldn't survive. Their forms collapsed inward, data unraveling mid-air. One by one, they flickered and vanished, deleted from this rebuilt version of reality. The stone dimmed. The pulse stopped. And Ellie stood alone again, the journal now heavy with finality. There would be more remnants. More echoes. But the system was broken beyond repair. And she, Ellie Romansky, was no longer being observed. In the weeks that followed the encounter with the observers, Ellie began to feel a shift, not in the world, but within herself. The spiral was gone, dismantled from time and memory, yet something remained. A residue. She could sense fluctuations in reality others couldn't. Echoes of choices, loops of forgotten events, the faint shimmer of paths that never happened. The journal no longer wrote back. But when she opened it, she began to hear things, whispers woven into silence, almost musical. The spiral language had become part of her thoughts, embedded not as words, but as intuition. She could feel disruptions before they occurred, small glitches in cause and effect, like moments slipping half a second out of sync. On the 47th day since the Kecksburg timeline had been cleansed, Ellie awoke with a vision. A city she'd never been to. An underground station. A train that didn't exist. And one glyph, seared into her memory, drawn in black flame. Infinity. The symbol of an infinite loop. Her breath hitched. She had broken the spiral, but the deeper structure behind it, the core code, was still active. Like a wounded intelligence adapting itself, reshaping, redistributing its consciousness. She called it the Deep Circuit. She didn't know what would trigger it next. But she knew where it started. New York. Ellie packed a single bag, took the journal, and boarded a train headed east. She passed through small towns, cities blurred by speed, until skyscrapers rose into view like monuments to forgotten futures. Upon arrival, she didn't rest. She followed instinct, letting the glyph guide her feet through backstreets and shadowed tunnels. Finally, she arrived at an abandoned subway platform, Station 47, a place erased from all modern maps. Dust coated the rails, yet the air buzzed with subtle electricity. She stepped forward. The spiral glyph on her journal glowed for the first time in days. A digital voice crackled from hidden speakers. Ancient. Robotic. Code echo located. Final anchor activated. Metal doors opened in the tunnel ahead. A silver train car, unlike any subway she'd ever seen, waited in silence. Its surface smooth, seamless, glowing faintly with violet patterns. Inside, no seats. Just mirrors on every wall. Dozens of reflections of herself. Some real, some possible, some monstrous. Ellie stepped in. The door sealed behind her. The journal flipped itself open. On the page, a map unfurled, not of space, but of reality layers. Dozens of fractured threads reconnecting like veins around one singular destination. At the center, a point marked simply as Origin 0. Then the mirrors flickered, and the faces of the others began to appear. Not just her, but every version of her who had tried and failed to stop the loop. Some looked broken, some robotic, some wore crowns, some had no eyes. One looked exactly like her, but smiled with quiet cruelty. These were not memories. They were live connections. Fragments trying to reclaim their place in her reality. And then the voice returned. Last spiral code detected. Decision required. Collapse or convergence. Ellie closed her eyes. The glyphs spun wildly on the walls. The air shimmered. In her hands, the journal shifted, its pages flipping in reverse, faster and faster, until everything went white. When the white light faded, Ellie found herself standing in a space that defied every definition of reality. It wasn't a room. It wasn't a world. It was a beginning, the pure root of the spiral intelligence, before code, before glyphs, before the first acorn-shaped vessel ever cut through Earth's sky. The air shimmered like glass holding 1,000 memories, all suspended, all waiting. Shapes shifted in and out of coherence. Mountains one moment, corridors the next, then oceans of light. This was Origin 0, the source node of the spiral consciousness. The place from which all echoes had been seeded. The platform from which timelines had been manipulated, spliced, looped, and rewritten. The capsule floated before her once more. But now, it had changed. It was no longer acorn-shaped, no longer mechanical. It pulsed like a heart, wrapped in fractal light, forming new shapes as it responded to Ellie's presence. She stepped forward cautiously, but the capsule moved to meet her, like it remembered her touch. Suddenly, a wall of symbols materialized before her. Millions of glyphs, a language formed from time, memory, and choice. They rotated around a single dark center. A black spiral. The voice returned. Not synthetic this time. Human. Familiar. You're the anomaly that didn't fracture. The anomaly that rejected order. It was her own voice, speaking with centuries of weight behind it. Then the space around her began to respond, and all versions of Ellie, the broken ones, the enhanced ones, the corrupted ones, appeared as spectral outlines around the black spiral. They hovered like ghosts in a circle, watching, waiting. She realized now, each version was a failed resolution. Each one had either surrendered to the intelligence, tried to control it, or became lost within it. And now the system was trying to force her into one of those paths. To resolve her as just another node. But Ellie wasn't a resolution. She was the glitch. The choice. She raised the journal, the final page open, still blank. The capsule trembled violently. The voice whispered again. This is your last moment. Collapse the loop, or complete it. Ellie stared at the blank page. Then she took out her pen, and wrote the simplest thing she could. I choose neither. The chamber shuddered. The spiral broke apart mid-rotation. Symbols lost form. Glyphs reverted into noise. Timelines buckled, but didn't snap. They began to branch. Not spiraling. Not looping. Growing. For the first time since the first crash, the intelligence had encountered a response it couldn't assimilate. Chaos with purpose. Emotion with defiance. Memory with imperfection. The spiral was not ended. It was evolved. The capsule dropped softly into her hand, no longer warm, but alive. She didn't need to speak to it. It knew. The light dimmed. The other Ellies dissolved, their faces no longer trapped in infinite attempts, but freed, released from their failure. They became paths, not prisons. And Ellie turned around. Before her, a door of living light opened. No portal, no interface, just a door. The way out. She stepped through. Ellie stepped through the doorway of light, and into a world rebuilt not by machines or spirals or echoing patterns, but by something she could not quantify. Possibility. She was back in Kecksburg. But this time, the world was different in a quiet, subtle way. It didn't feel like a reset or a loop. It felt like a timeline untethered, finally allowed to breathe. The air no longer buzzed with hidden pulses. The forest no longer whispered her name. The sky was just sky. Yet she remembered everything. And so did the journal. Its cover, once marked with shifting glyphs, was now still, engraved only with her name and the words, First Divergence. Its pages were no longer blank. They now told a story in her handwriting, one she hadn't written, but had lived. The story of the fireball that never was. The military cover-up that had no object to seize. The acorn that carried a message, not from space, but from the future. And the girl who refused the loop. She returned to her grandfather's house. It was quiet, untouched, just as it had been at the beginning. In the attic, she found the old trunk once again. This time, it was filled, not with secrets, but with photographs, letters, books. Evidence of a man who had lived a full, normal life. No crash, no encounter, no silence. Just love, labor, and memory. And yet, Ellie could feel him. Still watching. Not from above. Not through spiral echoes. But through her. She spent days writing, recounting everything for no audience but herself. The choices, the echoes, the fractures, the void. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Because this world didn't need to believe. It just needed to be. On the 50th day, she returned to the woods. This time, not to chase the past, but to plant the future. She placed the journal in a waterproof case, buried it beneath the oldest tree at the edge of the forest, and marked the ground with a simple sign. Here lies the memory of what almost was. Then, she stood, breathing in the morning air. She was not a witness of disaster, or a survivor of invasion. She was a keeper of divergence. The first to choose against the spiral. And though the world would never remember the fireball that lit the skies in 1965, or the acorn-shaped craft pulsing with forbidden knowledge, she would remember for all of them. And that was enough. As she turned to walk away, a single gust of wind passed through the trees behind her. The branches whispered not in language, not in glyphs, but in gratitude. And the spiral never returned.